A man in Osaka once had 11 minutes to decide whether to sell a company his father built. 11 minutes. The buyer was standing in the room, checkbook practically open, a lawyer beside him already flipping to the signature page, and every instinct in that man's body was screaming at him to sign before the offer disappeared. He didn't sign. He stood up, thanked the buyer, and said he needed 3 days. Not because he had a better offer waiting, not because his lawyer told him to stall. He said he needed 3 days because of a single word his grandfather taught him when he was 9 years old, standing in a garden, watching him rake sand into patterns around a rock. 3 days later, he sold the company for almost double what was on the table that first day. I want to tell you what happened in those 3 days, and the word behind it, because once you understand it, you'll never make a big decision the same way again. And I mean that literally. This is the difference between the people who build real wealth and the people who build regret, and most people have never even heard the word. I first ran into this idea in a small business in Kyoto, not from a book, not from a business school case study, from a woman named Imiko who ran a 100-year-old textile company that had survived 2 recessions and a pandemic without laying off a single employee. I asked her, half joking, what her secret was, expecting something about efficiency or discipline or some clever pricing strategy. She said one word. Ma. I didn't know what she meant, and honestly, at first it sounded like nothing. She tried to explain it to me using her hands, tracing a gap in the air between 2 fingers, and I nodded like I understood, which I didn't. It wasn't until months later, after watching how she actually ran her business, that it clicked. Every major decision she made had this strange delay built into it. Not procrastination. Something else entirely. A deliberate, almost sacred pause between the moment a decision presented itself and the moment she acted on it. At the time I thought it was just a personality quirk, maybe a cultural habit that didn't really change outcomes either way. It took me a long time, and a conversation with a very different kind of businessman, to realize it was actually the entire reason her company had outlasted 3 generations of competitors who'd all moved faster than her and gone bankrupt doing it. Here's the uncomfortable part, and I want to say this clearly because it applies to basically everyone watching this, including me for most of my life. We've been trained to treat speed as intelligence. Someone makes a call fast, and we call them decisive. Someone hesitates, and we call them weak, or indecisive, or scared of commitment. Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist who won a Nobel Prize for his work on decision-making, spent decades studying exactly why this instinct betrays us. His research split thinking into 2 systems. One is fast, automatic, emotional. It's the part of your brain that reacts to a good deal, a scary headline, a countdown timer telling you an offer expires in 10 minutes. The other is slow, deliberate, and almost always more accurate, but it only activates if you actually give it time to switch on. The entire sales, marketing, and negotiation industry has figured this out, by the way. That's not an accident. Limited time offers, countdown timers, only 3 left in stock. Every single one of those tactics exists because they know something most of us don't consciously realize. The faster you force someone to decide, the more you're routing them straight into that fast, emotional, error-prone system, and away from the slow one that actually protects them. So when that buyer stood in front of the Osaka businessman with a checkbook and an offer that felt too good to slip away, he wasn't just facing a business decision. He was facing a countdown timer, dressed up as an opportunity. And he knew it, because his grandfather had spent years teaching him to recognize exactly that trap. I want to tell you about someone else, briefly, because contrast makes this land harder than just hearing about the man who got it right. A friend of a friend, someone I met at a conference a few years back, took the opposite path in almost the exact same situation. Different industry, similar stakes. He was offered a partnership buyout on a Friday afternoon, with the buyer implying, not directly stating, that the offer would be off the table by Monday. He signed that same evening, over dinner, because the number looked good and the wine made the fear of losing it feel bigger than the fear of getting it wrong. 18 months later, he found out the buyer had known about a pending contract renewal that would have roughly tripled the company's value within the year. Nothing illegal happened. No lie was told. The buyers simply didn't volunteer information nobody forced them to volunteer, and the seller never gave himself enough time to go looking for it himself. He told me the worst part wasn't even the money. It was realizing, months later, that the panic he felt that Friday evening wasn't really about the deal at all. It was about the deadline. Remove the deadline, and the panic evaporates, and underneath the panic there's usually just a normal decision that deserved a normal amount of thought. That's the whole trap, laid bare by 2 men who lived the same moment differently. One gave the moment room to breathe. The other let the moment's artificial urgency make the decision for him. So what actually is Ma? The literal translation is something close to the space between. But that translation flattens something much bigger than a language gap can hold. In Japanese music, Ma isn't the silence between notes. It's treated as part of the composition itself, as important as the notes on either side of it. A pause held a half-second longer than expected changes the entire emotional weight of the piece that follows it. Musicians train for this the way Western musicians train for pitch. In Japanese architecture, Ma shows up as empty space that's never accidental. Walk into a traditional room and the emptiness isn't unfinished, it's designed. The room breathes because of what isn't there, not despite it. Western design instinct tends to fill space. Japanese design instinct treats the gap itself as content. And in conversation, Ma is the pause before someone responds to something difficult. In a lot of Western business culture, that pause reads as awkward, even suspicious. We fill silence compulsively, sometimes talking ourselves into worse positions just because quiet felt uncomfortable for 4 seconds. In traditional Japanese business etiquette, that same pause is read as a sign of respect, of genuine consideration. Nobody rushes to fill it, and nobody assumes silence means something's wrong. Put all three together and you get the actual principle underneath the word. Ma isn't empty. Ma is where the real decision happens. Everything before it is just information gathering. The pause is where information actually turns into judgment, and skipping it means acting on information you haven't finished collecting yet, whether you realize that or not. Now here's where this becomes a wealth principle specifically, not just an aesthetic one, because I know that's the part you actually clicked for. Japanese business culture has a concept that grows directly out of Ma, used specifically around major financial commitments, called Ma o toru, roughly, taking the space. It shows up most visibly in how negotiations get conducted. In a lot of Western deal-making, silence during a negotiation feels like losing ground, so people rush to fill it with a counteroffer, a concession, a justification nobody asked for. Skilled negotiators trained in this tradition do the opposite on purpose. They let the silence stretch, sometimes for what feels like an unbearably long time, because they understand that whoever breaks the silence first usually reveals the most information, and often gives away the most value in the process. Think about the businessman from the opening. 11 minutes to decide. That's not a decision window. That's a pressure tactic wearing the costume of an opportunity. The moment he asked for 3 days, he did two things at once. He removed himself from the buyer's artificial timeline, and he forced the actual value of the deal to reveal itself without the fog of urgency sitting on top of it. What happened in those 3 days wasn't magic. He talked to 2 other potential buyers who hadn't been part of the original conversation, because now he had time to actually go looking for them. He found out the original buyer had a reason to want a fast close that had nothing to do with generosity, and everything to do with an internal deadline of their own that had never been mentioned. Once he saw the deal without the countdown clock attached to it, the entire shape of it changed. He wasn't looking at one option anymore. He was looking at a market. That is what Ma actually protects. Not your comfort. Your information. So here's how you actually use this, because a philosophy that stays abstract is useless to you at 11 o'clock at night when someone's pushing you toward a decision. First, build a threshold. Decide in advance what counts as a big enough decision to require Ma, a dollar amount, a length of commitment, anything that would genuinely hurt if you got it wrong. Below that threshold, act fast. It's fine, most decisions don't deserve this treatment, and overthinking small stuff is its own trap that wastes just as much life as rushing does. Above that threshold, you owe yourself the pause, no exceptions, regardless of how the offer is framed or how good it feels in the moment. Second, when a big decision shows up, ask one specific question before you do anything else. Who benefits from me deciding this quickly? Not, is this a good deal? Who benefits from speed? If the honest answer is the other party, and not you, that's your signal to slow down immediately, because urgency built into an offer is almost never there for your benefit, even when it's dressed up as a favor to you. Third, give yourself an actual number, not a vague feeling. 24 hours for a mid-sized decision. 3 days for something that could change your life. Write the number down before emotion has a chance to negotiate it downward, because in the moment, you will absolutely try to talk yourself out of the pause you promised yourself, usually using the exact same excuse the pressure was built on in the first place. Fourth, and this is the step almost everyone skips, actually use the pause for something, don't just let time pass. Go find the information the urgency was designed to stop you from finding. Call the second buyer. Ask the question you were too polite to ask in the room. Sleep on it, literally, because there's real research showing sleep helps consolidate decision-making in ways caffeine and adrenaline never will. The pause isn't valuable because time magically fixes things. It's valuable because of what you choose to do inside it. And here's the part almost nobody tells you, the thing that separates this from just being scared to commit. Ma is not indecision. Ma has an endpoint built into it from the start. Emiko didn't hesitate on her business decisions forever. She took her pause, and then she moved, fully, without looking back. The pause has a job to do, and once that job is finished, the deciding happens fast and completely. The failure mode isn't taking the pause. It's never actually deciding once the pause is over, which is a completely different problem than the one we're solving here, and worth being honest with yourself about if it's something you tend to do. I asked Emiko, eventually, what her grandfather had actually taught her in that garden, tracing sand around a rock. She said he told her the rock never moves. Everything around it can shift, the sand, the light, the season, but the rock stays exactly where it is. And the space around the rock, the raked lines in the sand, that's not wasted space. That's where you can actually see the rock clearly, because there's room around it to look. She said most people make decisions standing so close to the rock they can't see its shape at all. Ma is stepping back far enough to actually see what you're deciding on, instead of just reacting to how close it feels in the moment. That's what the businessman understood in that room with the checkbook. That's what changed between minute 1 and minute 11 of that meeting, and what changed again over the 3 days that followed. Not the deal itself. His distance from it. If there's a decision sitting in front of you right now, something you've been feeling pushed toward faster than feels right, here's the only question worth asking before you do anything else. Is this urgency actually mine, or is it something someone else built and handed to me? Because the people who build real, lasting wealth aren't usually the fastest deciders in the room. They're the ones who figured out, sometimes the hard way, that the pause isn't the enemy of good decisions. It's the only place good decisions actually get made. If this changed how you'll look at your next big decision, stick around, because next week I'm breaking down a Japanese principle about why the people who seem to have the least are often building the most, and it completely reframes what starting with nothing actually means. And I want to know, what's one decision you made too fast that you'd take back if you could? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.